in the last election, and thank you very much. Democracy is important. And also my superstar panel, Attorney Vanita Banks, Masters in Tax, cybersecurity experts who've been helping us out for a long time, and Attorney Milton Grimes. We head into the holiday time period, and this is a great time in the sense that we get to stay in contact with families and friends, and hopefully we look out for those less fortunate. Attorney Banks, how are you doing today?
I'm well. How are you this morning, Attorney Lee?
Fantastic. I'm always excited, usually towards the end of the year. We had another year. The political climate didn't turn out as though I had hoped, but we have lots of friends and family who are doing well. And so we have a lot to be thankful for as we approach this Thanksgiving holiday time period. I was at the airport last night, Counselor, and I've never seen such a backlog of cars at the airport ever. I mean, in order to pick up passengers, the cars at our airport were backed up for what amount to an entire miles of cars lined up trying to pick people up at the airport. So that was late last night, and I was really amazed that we had that much traffic coming to Indianapolis Airport. And I'm sure that that's been repeated everywhere. It just shows the strength of our national economy. We experienced now one of the best economy in American history. And we saw an election where somehow the strength of our economy, the control of inflation, the mass amount of jobs available to people somehow got obscured in the political process. And we started dealing with the racial issues. We made people who were immigrants somehow criminals, and it became the model for the election. And unfortunately, common sense didn't prevail, and the person who was a clear chronic misrepresentation of facts, they somehow got elected. Just terrible results, but we have to live with it.
I'm still, of course, reflecting on this election and will be doing so, I'm sure, for quite a while. And during this holiday season, as well as we gather with family and friends, I'm thinking about, as we move forward, where do we go from here with the results of the election and what it means and what the lessons learned are and what are both the short-term and long-term strategies as we move forward. And what comes to top of mind for me is continuing voter education should be done at times much earlier than when there's a pending election. And also just basically looking at what are the communication vehicles and ensuring that we are maximizing the available communication vehicles for our education efforts, as well as more of a focus, a continued focus on just literacy in general, as well as financial literacy as well as we move forward. So those are just some of the things that I've been thinking about more broadly. And then in the short term, between now and the new administration, what can be done in order to address important issues. And I know it's an issue that's always at the top of your mind, Attorney Lee, and that is judges. We know that judges matter. And so there has been a strong effort to ensure that some of the Biden administration nominated judges actually are confirmed between now and the new year.
I thought that the White House, not being critical, but this is critical information, they kind of dropped the ball on these judicial appointments for the last 6 months. And they got appellate court judgeship. There's probably about 50 judgeships that they should had in the process done and voted on. And I think that the Senate Democrats just did a terrible job in terms of, clearing the pathway for these outstanding judges to be appointed. Here in Indianapolis, for example, they had noticed for the last 8 months that the federal district judge was retiring, and yet they did not select a candidate and submit to the Senate. There was no reason for that not to occur, except for the fact that they had a lot of staffing change at the White House, and I think they dropped the ball. Also, it was tumultuous things that happened. The president of the United States started the process of running for re-election, and then in the middle of the race, he abruptly dropped out back in late June after that disastrous debate performance. And since then, it's almost as though the Senate Democrats forgot the fact that they had all these potential openings. Or if they didn't forget, they shouldn't do a whole lot to move the matter forward, in my opinion. So that's where we are today in terms of judicial appointments. And
I felt the same way. And I'm sorry to hear you say that, because I felt, well, what have we been doing for the last several months that now we're at the end of the year and we're trying to rush these confirmations through? It's my understanding that at least 12 of them, that a deal had been reached with the Senate Republicans, that the Biden administration remaining judges, I think there's about 14, if I'm not mistaken, 12 to 14 will move toward confirmation, but that 4 will not. And that those 4 depend on whether or not any of those judges, or at least 2 of them, will decide to not actually retire. And so we'll see what happens with those. 2 had announced retirement. But I did note that in one of the federal judgeships in Ohio, one of the judges decided not to retire. And I'm not sure whether that is based on any type of partisan reason, but that's the status of judicial confirmation, nominations and confirmations as I know it at this point, Attorney Lee.
Well, see, what has been disturbing is that the White House lawyers who did this, they've just not been on top of this, in my opinion. And the White House had a significant amount of turnovers in the last couple of years, and that may have contributed to it. But the bottom line is that I thought they just dropped the ball. And, all the good works that they've done was not correctly publicized. And now we're hanging by a few more days before the administration changes. And we're going to have the most radical change in the political leadership we've had probably since the Civil War. We have the new administration. I was looking at their appointment, and all these Black Republicans, Scott and Donald, who did everything was sold their soul to the devil during the campaign, I noticed that he has not invited them to serve in his administration yet. Out of the 20 or so appointments, he finally named a single African-American who was a right-wing conservative African-American, like Tea Party type person, to head up an agency. And so for all those folks who thought that the administration would be diverse, that is not going to occur based on the appointments that he set forth already. And some of the persons, Attorney Banks, that he attempted to appoint, like Matt Gaetz, we got the famous singer in prison now for doing the same thing, R. Kelly. And Gaetz resigned from Congress. They did not release his results. And he was nominated to be Attorney General of the United States. It's just incredible that occurred. But of course, he withdrew. But the point is, the fact that he was nominated speaks volume as to the selection of candidates the administration is looking at for their team. It's shockingly shocking information in terms of some of the candidates that they considered and going to be appointed.
Absolutely. And I wonder whether, with respect to Mr. Gates, whether they will find some place in the administration that may not require a Senate confirmation. We'll see.
You know, it's rarely ascertainable that he's going to get some type of appointment because all those White House jobs, you know, working for the president himself don't require Senate confirmation. So I'm thinking that there's 100% probability that he'll end up working in some capacity at the White House because he resigned from Congress, and that, of course, prevented them from taking action against him in Congress in releasing what they said was a very damning report of sex exploitation and things like that. And, you know, it was a very sordid bit of information. And it was so bad that the MTG, Marjorie Taylor Greene, said if the Republicans on the panel released the adverse information on Matt Gaetz, that she was going to release information on them. So she was pointing out, I guess, indirectly that you have some significant misconduct within their party that she had planned to expose. So this is kind of a bad sign for democracy. We always held in the principle that what makes America exceptional is the fact that the motto is that no man is above the law. Well, we just saw this past November election that is not true. We know at least one or more person is above the law, and so as a result, our system of democracy is at a very, very significant period in American history. Now, the second thing I need to talk about in Chicago, Attorney Banks, we had Jesse Smollett. Is it Jesse or Jesse?
Jussie, Jussie.
Jesse Smollett. Yeah, you know, I can't remember all the details of what happened, but somehow they tried and convicted him and sent him to jail. What do you recall? I know I remember some of the peripheral stuff, but I don't remember all the detail. What happened to Jussie Smollett?
Well, this case dates back to early 2019 when Jussie Smollett was arrested for allegedly I'm sorry, for allegedly falsely asserting that a hate crime was that he was the victim of a hate crime, for falsely alleging that he was a victim of a hate crime and making false statements to Chicago police officers. And so he entered into an agreement with the state's attorney's office after having been indicted on 16 counts of felony disorderly conduct. He entered into an agreement where he would engage in community service and forfeit his $10,000 bond. And so he, as part of that negotiation, the state's attorney's office entered into what they call well, there's a Latin word for it, but a non-prosecution agreement, right? And that ended the case. And so following that agreement, a retired appellate judge filed a motion for a special prosecutor. And at that time, interestingly, Attorney Lee, both the then Mayor Rahm Emanuel and the then President Donald Trump, they issued, among others, statements that condemned the resolution of the case. And so a judge to whom that motion for special prosecutor was filed, actually granted that motion, and Attorney Dan Webb, the special appointed prosecutor, then filed 6 counts of felony disorderly conduct against Mr. Smollett. And that was followed by a trial, which resulted in a sentence. The jury convicted Mr. Smollett of all 5 counts of felony disorderly conduct, which resulted in a 30 months probation and 150 days would be served in Cook County Jail, and over $120,000 restitution to the city of Chicago, and $25,000 fine. Mr. Smollett, I believe, served about 6 days in the Cook County Jail before he was released pending his appeal, which 2 days ago, the Illinois Supreme Court reversed the decision on due process grounds. And the first sentence of the decision reads as follows: that the public justifiably expects the state above all others to keep its bond. So in short, once the state's attorney's office and the state had agreed to the plea deal, that they couldn't come back and renege on that deal by the way that they did in this case.
You know, that's a tragedy in the sense that, you know, I've had dealing in some litigation with some Chicago police officers. In both my cases, counsel, they were chronic liars. Even when we went to court, one of my closing argument, that's what I said. This is chronic liars. And so even when you present evidence, they still ignore it. And I was concerned about that. So if those prosecutors going to rely on misstatement by witnesses and prosecutor, I think that it should apply to police officers who also commit fraudulent allegations during courts and trials to get people convicted. And I was concerned about that. I wasn't a big fan of somebody going out and claiming they're a victim of a crime, by no means, but I just think that they made a big deal out of nothing, quite frankly.
You had raised that point during that time frame. We discussed this case many times. And, you know, again, the allegations were that he staged a hate crime attack on himself and then made false statements to the Chicago police. And the Illinois Supreme Court made it very clear that their opinion was not based on the merits at all, but that the prosecution cannot renege on a deal with a defendant once the defendant has already relied on it to his detriment. And so that is the principle of law that comes from the Illinois Supreme Court's reversal of this case on Thursday. You know, these non-prosecution agreements, as you know, and I'm sure that Attorney Grimes will have an opinion on this as well, that they must be honored. You know, otherwise that's a huge constitutional violation of due process, and, you know, constitutes, frankly, double jeopardy.
And the fact that he had done the time that was imposed by the agreement or the deal. So it doesn't make sense.
Well, and Pierre is stating whether we're taking calls. I believe we are. And he's right. He's analogizing the Smollett case with the Cosby case, you know, despite one's opinion regarding the facts. These cases turned on and justifiably turned on the legal precedent.
Well, our calling number is 833-653-3529, 833-653-3529. What I was concerned about is that in the Smollett case, that, okay, who is the victim of this so-called crime? In other words, did somebody get shot? Did somebody get beaten up? Did somebody get property stolen from it? I didn't get why they would spend so much time and resource prosecuting someone for essentially, in their opinion, lied to the police department. I mean, if police officers are allowed to lie to citizens, I just curious, Milton, Vanita, why does it work both ways?
But what's the main issue, that prosecuting someone who lied to the police, or prosecuting someone twice who made an agreement with the prosecutorial office? And that should be honored. I don't know if that's the first or the second issue. Don't you think that should be honored? That's the main issue.
Well,
when
yeah,
you go in and make a deal and start your sentence, that closes it.
That
well,
you're absolutely right, and that is what the Illinois Supreme Court found, and that was also what the Illinois Appellate Court upheld the judgment, but there was one dissent by Justice Fredrina Lyle, which concurred with, and which the Illinois Supreme Court quoted several portions of her opinion in its opinion, its 32-page opinion issued this week.
Counsel, you said that Judge Lyles wrote a dissent opinion in the appellate court case, or
in the appellate court case, on the same grounds that the Supreme Court ruled this week.
She's an outstanding jurist. I got a great deal of respect for Judge Lyles. She's been active in the bar association, things like that. Very knowledgeable judge. I didn't read her opinion before, however.
And that's one of the reasons I'm shouting her out as well. She's been very actively involved in the National Bar Association, and just a outstanding jurist.
Yeah, and so I'm ecstatic though that not for Mr. Smollett, but for the rule of law, in terms of we have to have, you have all this crazy stuff go around. And I saw the police department, they were on TV every day. And though there was a mass murder committed, I mean, with all the things that were going on, somehow they made a big statement. And I thought that it was more an attack on the African-American prosecutor more than anything else. It seemed like that they were going after the prosecutor at that time. I could be wrong, but that was my perception of what they were doing. They were simply sensationalized this event, not counting the fact that I thought that oftentimes the Chicago Police Department in certain instances was doing a lousy job for the citizen, protecting the citizen. For whatever reason, I thought that they used this case to criticize the DA.
And that, in fact, is true, Attorney Lee. In fact, State's Attorney Kim Foxx decided not to run again for her position, and she was interviewed yesterday regarding this case, and she stated as well that so much time and energy and money was expended on this investigation, this case, this trial, and she ultimately stated, and remember, she recused herself from this litigation as well early on. And one of the things she said as she's retiring is, and I hate to see our African-American female prosecutors state this, but she said she's retiring, not retiring, but that she is she was asked, well, what are you going to be doing, next? What's next for you? And she stated, rest and healing. And it just seems to me that our African-American female prosecutors should not be beaten and injured so badly that they have to outright state that they have to heal after serving in these positions as public servants.
Nate, if I may just give an experience I had with a murder case. I know both of you know of the case where the woman killed her baby, postpartum psychosis, and the judge reduced my case from murder second to manslaughter. And he also set aside the finding of sanity and found her insane. And he sent her to outpatient rather than inpatient treatment. The DA appealed. 2 years later, the Court of Appeals said, "You're right, Mr. DA. The judge did not have the authority to set aside the finding of sanity. He could reduce it to a manslaughter, but he didn't have the authority to set aside the finding of sanity because that's a jury question, and the jury found her sane. However, since she has been sentenced and she is serving that time for the last 2 years in outpatient treatment, it would be unfair to the defendant to revoke that sentence and re-sentence her to something else because she has changed her life and is doing her sentence of outpatient treatment. And for that reason, we will let this judge's opinion or ruling stand, even though he lacked the authority and it was incorrect. So going back and relitigating a matter that's been resolved in the court is unprecedented.
Wow. But Attorney Banks, do you think that the attack on Mrs. Smollett was more so directed towards the state attorney, the district attorney Fox?
Yes, I do think that that's the case. Yes, I do think that there was some motivation in that regard. Yes, partially so.
Because of her race?
Yes.
That saddens me.
And because of
because
some of the progressive things that she was doing in the city of Chicago in terms of addressing equal justice based on the disproportionate impact of the criminal justice system on Black and minority groups in Chicago. I mean, cashless bond, I think a model for the country, was passed under her administration. And other reforms she ran on and was elected on were not popular with certain constituencies within the city of Chicago.
That I've always looked at Illinois as a progressive state, believe it or not, as much as I tease you, Vanita, and it's disappointing to see that be done because of her race in this city and the state.
And as we look across the United States at other African-American female prosecutors, many of them have experienced similar storms. Let's look at Fonnie Willis.
Yeah.
In Atlanta, Marilyn Mosby in, Baltimore. I mean, Marilyn Mosby, the first person that I'm aware of that was convicted from taking a loan from her own 401k.
Right.
What about the one in Orlando, Florida, and Kansas City?
Well, in Orlando, Florida, wasn't she fired by the governor?
Yes.
Yeah.
And good news, she was reelected on November 5th. Her first name is Monique.
Orrell.
Yes.
It was.
I wouldn't expect this attack to subside or lessen with our new administration.
She got 57% of the vote, and she defeated the appointed Andrew Bain, a member of the Conservative Federalist Society, who the governor appointed. So it was a good old-fashioned whooping, and and because she vowed not to prosecute abortion cases, and she ended the aggressive prosecution of Black cyclists and pedestrians. So for that, the governor removes her from office for being fair to all citizens. And this is the climate we're in now, where a political person, political power somehow that determined that being fair to minorities is being, quote, woke and unfit to serve in office.
And I really think that we have to resist those terms in the highest, degree. And we have to have counter positions when these ridiculous accusations are made. Back to Kim Foxx, she says in a recent interview, she permanently changed the prosecutor's office. And as I mentioned earlier, she stated that she has wounds from breaking the glass ceiling, but she's proud of her choices. She served for 8 years and she decided not to run, and she'll be replaced by a former appellate court justice, Eileen O'Neill Burke. Ms. Fox was the first Black woman to serve as the county's top prosecutor. During her 8 years in office, she approved hundreds of exonerations, helped legalize marijuana, and successfully pushed to abolish cash bail, as I mentioned, but she endured almost constant criticism for her, quote, so-called progressive approach.
Well, what did they think was so progressive about having people who presume innocent be able to get bail without putting their house and their life savings on the line? I was just curious, what was so progressive about what she was doing?
Well, I would not call that, quote, progressive. Again, we use these labels in a way to create a false premise or false narrative. I think it's positively progressive in as much as many individuals that are currently incarcerated awaiting trial are there because they simply cannot afford the bail. You're innocent until proven guilty, but yet you're incarcerated because you can't make bail. That's unconscionable. What do you think, Attorney Grimes?
I think it's something I've been fighting for 50 years and still fighting, which seems to me to be ridiculous. But I agree that people should be free until proven guilty unless they are dealing with a serious violent crime potential. And the court should analyze the case from that perspective. If they're not a flight risk and there's nothing to substantiate it, some of these brothers have never heard of a passport. Let's don't have one. And if they're not a danger to society, because they haven't threatened the whole of society, but it may be something between one person and them, or maybe some financial situation, then they should have a reasonable bond until they are convicted, if they are convicted. There are innocent people charged with crimes, y'all, believe it or not.
Well, one of my concerns is what she did as prosecutor, I thought was important for democracy. She had a conviction integrity unit. This was so-called progressive, right? Now, what did that consist of? That consisted of looking at cases where there was clear evidence of police misconduct. In other words, where they fabricated evidence, they committed perjury against innocent folks to secure a conviction. So because she identified over 200 cases of evidence falsification, that's what called progressive. I mean, it's insane.
That's not progressive. That's really just doing your job.
Right.
That's exactly right. And Attorney Lee, that addresses the point you've made in so many situations where in cases that you've personally handled, that there was evidence of, police lying in those cases. And so for her to address that should not be viewed in any way, viewed as, quote, progressive in a negative sense. But again, it's how words are taken and weaponized, against a particular individual. And when you talk about and ask the question whether whether the pushback was because, of her policies versus her race, it was both. And you can't always quantify the percentages, but, when you are a pioneer in doing something like establishing a conviction integrity unit, Attorney Lee, that's different from what has existed in the past. Of course, there might be, initially pushback because of an innovation. Let's call it an innovation. That would be a better word. Progressive is fine as well, as long as the words aren't demonized. And she received hate mail related to her race and her gender. She even saw the Proud Boys march on her office. So yes, it's fair to say that some of this criticism was based on her gender and her race.
We have a caller. Call, you have a question or comment for us today. Go ahead.
This is Pierre.
Hey, Pierre. What's your question or comment today, sir?
Oh, thank you. Boy, that was a struggle getting in. But real quickly, just wanted to say on a couple of the points. Jesse Smollett, he was prosecuted because he was a high-profile Black. And I got to remember all of the media attention that case was generating. Somebody said, we can't let this high-profile Black guy get away. And Kim Foxx, they felt treated her lenient. You guys covered all of that. But he's a high-profile Black guy. And that's why they went after him. The other thing is, just wanted to say real quickly, pardons. Joe needs to get on the stick and start pardoning some people like Merlin Mosby, Don Siegelman, who was an actual victim of George Bush's Karl Rove's machine back in the early 2000s, who got convicted for doing his job. They threw that guy in prison because they thought he was a governor that could carry the South for the Democrats in a presidential election. That's why he was prosecuted. He needs to be pardoned. And there's something else I wanted to say. It escapes me. But
what about Jesse Jackson Jr.? What do you think about Jesse Jackson Jr.? He got convicted and served time for campaign spending part of his campaign money.
Milt, respectfully, Nate, respectfully, please. He was up there. He misused his campaign finance monies, and you can't do that. You can't go spend your campaign finance monies on your woman and a whole bunch of other things. Now, if I was wrong about that, Vanita knows more about the situation. But I have, no compunction, no sympathies for Mr. Jackson. I'm glad you mentioned Reverend Jackson's son, because that reminds me of Reverend Jackson's speech, "Rocks Just Laying Around." Y'all should go look at that speech he gave back in '84 when he talks about the margin of despair. That's why we lost this election. A few people didn't go to the polls. Donald Trump's this popular vote thing is disappearing every day. And if we just got a few more people to go out and vote in certain areas, we could win this election. And getting off the radio real quick, Joe Biden or some Democrat who's going to run in 4 years needs to make the case right now that we are handing this man a great economy, and they need to go down point by point by point. So when the Republicans screw it up, we'll have a visual to fall back on. But he could be setting us up for 26 and 28, and he's just not doing it, giving the Ukrainians more bombs to go shoot at Russia and all of this crazy stuff. He needs to be setting us up for 26 and 28. Thank you for taking my call.
Okay, Imhotep, you had any comments for today?
All right. How you doing there, good brother?
Great.
Thanks for taking my call. I'll be brief. Couple of things of note that I think is very important. I watched the interview with the Oklahoma Superintendent of Public Instruction and his insistence on mandating the Trump Bible in schools in Oklahoma. If you went through and read through some of the comments in the social media, I was looking at this on YouTube. If you went through and read through some of the comments, people from Oklahoma were just flabbergasted. They're 45th in education, I think 47th in math, 48th English. They're at the bottom list. I did see one of the Republican colleagues from the state legislature says, there's no way you can force teachers to so-called teach the Donald Trump Bible, yet none of them have went to seminary school. And if you're going to require them to teach it, then everybody should have to go to seminary school. He was being tongue-in-cheek, meaning it's a silly idea. What happened to the separation of church and state? ACLU, I think, said they have that in court, but we know that problems that we have, definitely if it makes its way to the Supreme Court, which with these originalists and textualists, which Alito and others claim to be, what would be the chance of that withstanding scrutiny if it made to the Supreme Court? Number two, the overtime ruling in Texas. That's a critical ruling. I think the working class and those auto workers and everybody in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, construction, whatever workers you want to have, are not understanding or overstanding how detrimental that ruling was, the overtime, striking down Biden's overtime law. Like your opinion on that. And the last thing I had was—
Hey, wait a second, Imhotep, before you give your last thing, there's something I need to tell you real quickly that's important. I went to the bar meeting on Thursday night, and there's something that's happening that's even more devastating that most people are not talking about that we need to bring out. That is the affirmative action ruling. And we talked about it earlier. We had Professor Brown on the show, but here's the net result. Indiana University Law School, in this year, out of a class of 250, only admitted a single Black student.
What?
One Black student in the whole freaking class. Now, what we talked about this very briefly. We talked about MIT. MIT is the world's #1 research institution, got $1 zillion in money, and they dropped their admission of Black students by about 45%. That was significant. But then at the university, they've dropped the Black admission to their law school by 95%. And so when we're talking about all these issues, care like charity begins at home. We've seen a radical departure for Black mobility in higher education, because people, this is important. The wealth of any community, particularly in the minority community, is based upon the number of people with advanced degrees. So you have people with PhDs, law degree, medical degrees, MBAs. That community going to be more affluent than one where people are high school dropout. It's very simple. It's very so
which creates businesses, which helps with the affluency there too, because that ultimately helps create businesses or supports businesses and things like that. So I get what you're saying. I didn't know it was down to one. What about the medical school? I know the medical school.
May I interrupt and ask what was the number the year before that? I mean, give me a base
Well,
Just the
generally they will have 20 to 25, not a
Okay.
lot, but
just curious. No, I'm just curious.
yeah, it'd be like 9-10%.
Okay.
It's nothing dramatic, like
One is up.
30%.
Yeah. Okay.
But
Right.
What about the medical school? Because they take in IU Medical School take in the most students of any medical school. So I know everybody tries to run there. Do we have any numbers on that?
I'm going to get that in by our next show. I don't have that now because this evidence is just trickling in now. And
Right, because
the more I
I
look
did
at it,
read that. Yeah, I did read that Yale and Harvard stayed pretty much pat. I think Brown stayed. Maybe Brown increased. I think others have gone down. I think there's some issues at the University of Florida. I saw Emmitt Smith was pretty angry about that down there. So there is a blowback on that. But going back to your bail argument and what Illinois and other places have done, and what we get to push back here, Attorney Banks, we've got people here. Pastor James Jackson, who's in bed with the FOP, and he doesn't think you should get. Actually, the FOP president think you shouldn't get bail for anything. You shouldn't get bail for a speeding ticket. They don't think you should get bail for anything. Remember, they struck down the nonprofit that was assisting people to get bail money here, which was powered by the FOP going to the State House. And Pastor Jackson, a black pastor, is in with that. Now, he wants to talk about, well, let's move him forward and hurry up and get him adjudicated, this, that, and the third. We know that's a time-consuming process. You got motions, you got the continuations, all kind of stuff like that. But trust me, you listen to them, they don't want anyone to get bail. It's horrible when you listen to them. It's really horrible. It's really horrible. Thank you for taking my call.
That's hard to imagine. They don't want anyone to have bail for offenses.
Unfortunately, I don't have an intelligent reply to that because I don't practice in criminal law, and I've not followed that. But we have one of the, I think, the top prosecutor in the United States of America, Ryan Mears. And I know personally that he has been out in the community doing a lot of things to try to make justice fair. He has an integrity unit, and he's been doing something remarkable. That is that a lot of African American with criminal histories and things like that, and have a driver's license, he's helping them to get their driver's license and erase their criminal history free of charge. He's been doing this in order for them to go out and get good paying jobs so they can be productive citizens, so they have to go out and commit more crimes. So he's been very progressive. But on the other hand, Milton, that's something that you said that I think people need to understand, that we believe in justice and accountability. So when you have people go out and murder people, I think we all agree that maybe that type of person should not be out on the street going out and harm someone else. So there's different type of crimes, and we want to make sure that people understand that we recognize there are crimes of violence against people. And then there's crimes of financial crimes. There's crimes of things that doesn't involve actual harm to individual. There's difference. And, like a DUI, for example, is a crime, but a DUI where you go out and kill somebody while you're drunk, that's a different type of crime.
That's fierce because you got an addiction.
So in other words, I think that people need to understand that we're not advocating that everybody should be set free. That's not what we're saying.
Right.
I want to make that clear.
All right. I was reading the pathology on Gascon's losing the election out here by such a large margin. And the analysts say that he just came over too fast and too hard with his, quote, progressive program, as opposed to taking his time and explaining it to the line deputies a little clear and not just pushing it on them, which developed their resistance. This man, said, hey, we got to stop sending people to prison because of priors. What were those priors? Were they just nonviolent priors, or were they violent priors? Are they a present danger to society, or do they have a problem? Rather than you got 3 strikes, you got to go to prison for 25 to life. There's no analysis of the individual, just what does the statistics show? And some people have gone to prison for 25 to life for stealing a 6-pack of beer or for just a minor crime, puts them in prison for life. So he said, we got to change that. We got to change the gun thing. Did the person use the gun, or were they with somebody else with the gun? So we got to look at these cases for the environment and the behavior of that person as opposed to other extenuating circumstances and allegations. The gangs allegation. You can damn near put a gang allegation on every young man that lives in the neighborhood because they have associates or relatives who are in gangs. But were they doing this crime for the benefit of the gang? Or is it because that they were with the person who was in a gang, so now automatically they are gang related? So he came in with, I hate to use the word progressive, but he came in with the idea of changing some of the principles that were being used to incarcerate people, Nate, for rather than 10, 20 years, rather than 5, for 10 years. And that was inhuman. But he lost. He lost.
And
He lost to a man that's promising to prosecute and lock them up because they stealing from rich folks. They stealing over here in these rich neighborhoods. They breaking into jewelry stores in mass. So they got to go down. And that's a small percentage of the crime rate.
Let me ask the question relative to your point, Milton. These athletes, these high-profile athletes that are having their homes broken to.
Yeah.
What's driving that? Well, I guess my question is, what kind of security systems do they have?
Okay.
And what kind of security do they have, period? With some of these kind of homes, I probably would have security posted, 24/7 in front of my home.
Not just an alarm, several individuals and a dog. I understand what you're saying, but they're easy targets because they like to flash. I mean, Vanita, they walk, some of them, and I don't have anything against what a man wears, but some of them walk around with $500,000 worth of jewelry dangling on their wrists and the neck.
Understood. And then a lot of it is boasted about on Instagram all day, every day, right?
I'm going to Popeyes for breakfast, or I'm going over here. I'll be over here if y'all want to come and get all. Yeah, it's just everybody got to get more intelligent about their wealth, I guess, or their safety. And some seem to think, I believe, I don't have any statistics for it, that because of their stardom, that they are sort of immune. But that's not how you live in this life today. You don't walk down the street with a known $25,000 necklace hanging around your neck, do you? I hope you don't, unless you're with some type of security. You got Nate with somebody.
That's an excellent point. A point of departure on this issue, folks. There's a lesson to be learned by everyone. This comment Attorney Banks and Attorney Rhyme talked about, that is the social media. Folks, it's a dumb idea to post your whereabouts on social media. I see people put on social media, they're out of the country. I'm in Jamaica. I'm in Mexico. Why are you doing that? You're inviting criminals to come to your home. When you're flashing wealth, you're inviting crime. I'm not saying the crime is justified. I'm saying don't invite criminals into your home by telling them your whereabouts. Folks, it's a bad idea. I see it on social media every day, and I'm thinking, please, please protect yourself by not posting your whereabouts, particularly when you're out of your home. And so it's just a bad idea. Bad idea, Milton, Vanita.
Yeah. So it's just common sense. Shit.
I agree, and they need to pay for armed security, period, .in. I guess you can disengage some of these systems so that the cameras don't work.
Right.
But you need armed security. I mean, it doesn't make sense. And everybody knows that, or these criminals know when the games are, right? So some of these break-ins have occurred during the game. I'm speaking about the Kansas City athletes now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I just think it's terrible what's happening to these folks because they have a certain amount of wealth that they become victims like that. But we need to all be more vigilant, particularly during this time of year. This time of year, a lot of time we have a lot of emotional overtures. We have a higher degree of the depression, suicide, and things like that. So people look at their life, and sometime this time of year, they look at despair and desperation. and just protect yourself, protect your property, and be safe, and make sure that you be vigilant, that you don't post these type of things and invite criminal misconduct to occur. We won't be on next week because it's Thanksgiving, folks. Join us back first week in December. And at this time, on behalf of all of us, we wish you a safe and happy Thanksgiving. And make sure you say a prayer for all those folks who are in need. And also for the fact that we tried hard, we fell short in the last election, but don't give up the struggle. The fight continue. Thank you.
Thank you, and God bless everyone.
Yeah. Start studying next election now.
Take care, everyone.